And defense ministers of Russia, Turkey, and Syria have held talks in Moscow in a clear sign of normalization of relations between Ankara and Damascus in the decade-long Syrian war. Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar and the head of his national intelligence organization, Hakan Fidan, met Syrian Defense Minister Mahmoud Abbas and Syrian intelligence chief Mamlouk in Moscow, along with Russia's defense minister. The Turkish Defense Ministry says ways of resolving the Syrian crisis and the problem of refugees, as well as joint efforts to combat extremist groups in Syria, have been discussed. And for more on this, for more on this talk and the bombardment of Ukraine and the breakdown of peace negotiations, I'm now being joined from Washington, D.C. by global affairs analyst Calvin Duck and also by a foreign affairs analyst Kelechi Decker. Good to have both of you join us.
Good to be here.
Let me begin with you, Calvin. This has been 11 years of just coldness between Ankara and Damascus because of the...
Well, I think the full normalization, that's going to take a bit, but I do think this is a very positive sign. First meeting at this level in 11 years. What it shows definitely is there is political will on both sides to come to some type of a resolution. But as we know, Turkey and Erdogan, they're fighting more than one war. This isn't just against the Syrian regime, but they also have a more pressing conflict on their side by the Kurds. So I think that is pressuring Turkey to maybe start this rapprochement, and it's good to see that that's happening on both sides.
And perhaps one of the most important issues in all of this, in this conversation, because of the Kurds. We'll get to that in just a minute, but let me take the conversation to Kelechi Decker, because many are now signaling that perhaps this is a that.
The reality on ground is far more complicated than people are saying, because the three countries alone do not hold the power and the authority to bring peace in that region. There are a lot of organizations, so many of them, unnamed armed groups that are also perpetrating all sorts of things within the Syrian enclave. I mean, what we're having in Syria is like a conundrum, whereby you have Turkey on one side, you have Russia trying to rise up to play a role of a regional leader. Then you have Iran also seeing what's happening in Syria as an opportunity to push its own agenda. Then you have Syria that has the backing of both Iran and Russia, which has emboldened President Assad to show a little more intransigence in efforts at resolving the issue. But the issue of the Kurdistan issue is one that they don't want to address because it spills from Iran to Iraq to Turkey and also Syria. Then on top of the whole thing is that the U.S. dwindling strategic interest in Syria is also making the whole stuff quite complicated. So it's not something that because Turkey, yes, it's a welcome development that Turkey is now speaking with Syria, but it goes more than that because Syria has become a kind of a pawn on everybody's table.
It's in the priority for anymore for the West.
Well, I think it's complicated for the West, but as I was looking at the, comments coming after the meeting of the defense ministers, I couldn't help but think, the enemy of my enemy is kind of my friend. That's kind of the way that it ends up working out. And it's complicated for the U.S. and Western powers because obviously our priority is resolving the situation in Syria, against the Assad regime, but also Turkey is an ally. Turkey, is a NATO member. And so while we might not share that same fight with Turkey, we also want to be an ally in as much as we can. So that is why this conflict is so multidimensional and has lasted for so long. But I do think that the parties that can resolve it are there to resolve it. Turkey, Syria, and of course with help from the Russians in mediating the conflict, because Russia is so very close to the Assad regime.
But what do you, and I'm staying with you, Calvin, what do you make of the timing of this? And what's that to, because there is the Russian-Ukraine war ongoing, and there is also elections, parliamentary elections to be held in Turkey. So what do you make of the timing of it? And what do you think that the Volodymyr Zelensky and the Turkish president, Erdogan, stand to gain or benefit from these talks?
I think the biggest factor of timing is the elections coming up in June of next year that Erdogan is thinking about, because there's a huge sentiment in Turkey that, they want the Syrian refugees to be repatriated to go back home. They also want to see the president have a very strong hand against the Kurdish threats from the Turkish point of view at the border in Ukraine. I know he's got to be worried because Turkey had been playing a role of mediating. And if they are going to give concessions to Russia, if Russia helps mediate the issues that they have with Syria, that takes away from what I think Turkey would do in the Ukrainian conflict. So I know he must be worried.
And back to you, Kelechi, we saw sometime in this year where Turkey had blocked, I think it was Finland and another country trying to join NATO. I'm trying to remember the other country now. Trying to join NATO because of the issue of the Kurds who were living in those countries. They want them, moved back to Turkey. And this is one of the major issues here in this war. Turkey, there was an incursion by Turkey into Syria because it was trying to drive away the Kurds from the Kurdish militias. It sort of seems that is going to be a difficult point in these negotiations.
Yeah, I think the leverage that Turkey has over Syria and also over the discussion is the issue of repatriation of the Syrian refugees. But what Syria has over Turkey is giving Turkey the go ahead to enter into the Syrian territories to be able to fight with the PKK. But the thing is that it's somehow complicated in a way that Turkey, being a NATO ally, fighting the PKK, and even the US is training some of the Kurdish militia that's also helping them to fight the ISIL. In all this discussion, people seem not to be taking the ISIL angle serious, because they are also a factor there. Even though everybody is fighting them and they're fighting everybody, but some of these big powers are also using them inadvertently to be able to hurt some of their enemies. But what Turkey is doing presently is to see how they can manage the situation to get as much ground as they can to push the Kurds out and try as much as possible to stop the Kurds from having the ability to attack Turkey. If they're able to get that from Syria, then they might be able to, give in to one or two demands, either from Russia or from Syria. But with Iran also, it makes the whole thing a little bit complicated. But I still expect that the Arab nations still have a role. Assad has been sort of a kind of the most Arab, they don't have good relationship with Assad, and they've been working on that for some time. And this is where US also has a role to play. It's a kind of, the conundrum is something that is even made worse with the ongoing war in Ukraine, because all these things you're seeing are all power play being manifested by what's happening in Ukraine at present. And I hope they find a way to, to discover a middle ground if they can.
And another difficult point here maybe perhaps would be that who Turkey sees, or the group that Turkey sees as the terrorists, is different from who Russia sees as terrorists. Turkey sees PKK as terrorists, while Russia sees ISIS as terrorists. And Russia has been trying to convince Turkey for years to find other ways to address its security concerns instead of the military aggression against the Kurds. Do you think that perhaps that's also going to be another difficult point in this conversation?
Yes, it's going to be difficult because, you know, the Kurds have been fighting against the Syrian regime. Obviously, that's in the United States' interest. But we have to remember that for the Turkish people, this is a really big issue that I know it would be easier if they found different ways to deal with the Kurdish threats as they see them for terrorism and other, you know, threats to their territorial integrity. But it's so intrinsic to what's happening in Turkey. I don't think even if Russia, the United States, or anyone else proposes different ways to deal with it, it's going to be Turkey's main priority.
Situation, because that's very important. Ankara wants them to be returned to Damascus, but I'm not sure Damascus has what the capacity to accommodate them when you think of the logistics involved. Are we going to see a mass return of refugees anytime soon? Because that was part of the conversation. Calvin, that was for you.
Plan.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's the plan and that's the hope, and that includes not just countries in the region, but the Turkish people, because the refugee situation is becoming untenable. But it remains to be seen if these talks can be productive enough to actually start that repatriation anytime soon.
And I just want to quickly take a turn from this conversation, and I'm coming to you, Kelechi, because we're now seeing the war in Ukraine also taking a different turn. And we're seeing about 120 missiles have been launched in Ukraine in a fresh wave of attacks. There is Kyiv, there is Lviv, there is Kharkiv under bombardment. I will understand that even civilian infrastructure are also under bombardment. I just want to get your thought on that.
Yeah, basically, you know, Russia has tried everything they think they should do to bring Ukraine to their knees, especially during this winter. They've been trying as much as possible to halt some of the energy plants and other utilities, and to see if that would break down the Ukrainians. But that seemed not to be working. That's why I think they kind of upped the ante in launching the missiles as a more safer option to cause maximal damage in Ukraine than using foot soldiers to go in, because that has not worked in their favor in recent times. So they're going to continue doing that, and it depends on Ukraine's ability to be able to mitigate that and lessen the damages. And that's where the West comes in providing Ukraine with more air defense systems. The war is almost going to a year, and this is something we thought that will end in a few months. And it's from the look of things, this is going to still be a more prolonged war. And I'm afraid we might have a kind of Syrian situation whereby along the line, a lot of people might get tired of the whole war and they forget what's happening there, because
in
of
Syria.
the way.
I just want to quickly jump in and get Calvin's thought for just a minute before we wrap the conversation. Calvin, your thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine at the moment?
I agree with what my co-panelist said. Who would have thought almost a year ago that we would still be talking about this conflict in the way that we are, and that it would continue to intensify in some ways, although it hasn't exactly turned out the way Putin probably envisioned it. But I think we're going to see a real turning point this winter, because a lot of the issues that Europe and NATO and the United States didn't have to face when it wasn't winter, with the energy issues and the cold, they are. I think, unfortunately, it's going to lean towards diplomatic ends with Putin, which would end up threatening the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But like I said, it remains to be seen, but I don't think it's going to get any easier as winter is approaching.
Thank you both for talking to us. Calvin Dark, Global Affairs Analyst, and Kelechi Decker, also a Global Affairs Analyst. Both of you are speaking to us from the U.S., where there is a winter storm right now. Stay safe.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Away from